This is not a tax problem. So let's walk through it. We're going to use big numbers. I mean, round numbers, just to make it super simple for people. These are not exact numbers. So don't, in the comments, like these are just round numbers for everybody to get their head around.
Hello everyone, this is BTC Insight and welcome to yet another deep dive into BTC Insight. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet. You won't want to miss this.
Like many, James first heard about Bitcoin years ago, as early as 2015 when it was still trading in the low thousands. At one point, he even considered investing when Bitcoin was around $3,500. But when he asked other experts on Wall Street for advice, the response was unanimous. Stay away. It's rat poison squared. That phrase, originally coined by Warren Buffett, reflected the dismissive groupthink of Wall Street at the time. Nobody was doing their own research. They simply repeated what they heard, and James trusted their judgment. So he ignored Bitcoin. It wasn't until years later, when his own son began exploring the world of crypto, that James decided to take a closer look. At first, like many new investors, he experimented with altcoins, ethereum, Solana, Cardano. Bitcoin, by then priced around $65,000, didn't seem that exciting. But here's where the story turns. As he dug deeper, reading, studying, and listening to thinkers like Michael Saylor, Preston Pysh, Lynn Alden, and Jeff Booth, his perspective shifted. The more he learned, the less conviction he had in altcoins, and the stronger his conviction grew in Bitcoin alone.
To continue that journey, and what you're saying, I appreciate that. I truly do. I ended up starting a newsletter to try to teach people the inside scoop of Wall Street, like how this whole world operates and how it really operates, not just what you read in Wall Street Journal or in Barron's or whatever, or on Bloomberg. There are things that go on that that people just don't, they would never even fathom, And so I try not to speak in acronyms and explain exactly what we're talking about. And my audience is not, they're very smart people. They're either they could be tradesmen, firemen, plumbers, electricians, whatever, or they're doctors and lawyers and some politicians that, that they were never versed in this. They're just, they didn't get an education in this world. And we don't teach money. We teach some economics, but we don't really teach money and the central bank system and how it works. And so that's what I did. And along the way, just like you, I'd been introduced to Bitcoin a number of times. 2015, 2017, I was considering an investment in Bitcoin when it was $3,500. And, I've told this story a number of times before, but basically I went around Wall Street asking all the experts, the technology experts, this new technology is, what's it worth? What's it going to be worth? And every single one of them said, stay away from it. It's, it's the equivalent of rat poison squared. And that's what they had been hearing. And that's what they hadn't done their own research, of course. They had just known that, that's what other people were saying. That's a lot. Wall Street does that. It's we got a lot of sheep in Wall Street, as you can see by the markets. So I ignored it until my son came around and said, check out this crypto world. And I did. And I started buying Solana and Cardano and Ethereum and a little bit of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin was older and it was trading all the way up at 65,000. And I don't know, it just, in 2021, I was like, what? Didn't seem all that interesting. And then I started really doing my research and reading, and every single thing I read gave me more discomfort around all of the other protocols and more confidence and conviction in Bitcoin. And I eventually moved all of my money out of anything else, moved it into Bitcoin, and started studying that, semi-religiously, listening to Michael Saylor and Preston Pysh and and Lynn Alden and all the major players, and getting a really good understanding. Jeff Booth was instrumental in helping me understand just why Bitcoin is so necessary.
Here's where James Lavish connects the dots. If the government must keep printing to fund its deficits, then the value of the dollar will inevitably erode. Your purchasing power will continue to shrink. For James, Bitcoin represents an antidote. It's scarce, decentralized, and resistant to manipulation by central banks or governments. Unlike fiat money, Bitcoin cannot be printed at will. And unlike gold, it can be transferred across the world instantly, securely, and without intermediaries. In his view, Bitcoin is not just an investment, it's a lifeboat. It's a hedge against the inevitable consequences of a financial system that cannot escape its addiction to debt and money printing.
Just to frame it, everything you're talking about, the lunacy is, well, first of all, it's so bad that who wants to talk, who wants to face that? The politicians don't want to talk about it.
Mm.
The Treasury doesn't want to talk about it. The Fed doesn't want to talk about it. Yet they give hints. They give hints to Congress that y'all got to get your shit together. You're out of your ever loving minds. You've got to stop spending. This is not a tax problem. So let's walk through it. We're going to use big numbers. I mean, round numbers, just to make it super simple for people. These are not exact numbers. So don't, in the comments, like these are just round numbers for everybody to get their head around. The US spends about $7 trillion a year. Well, the US only takes in through taxes $5 trillion per year. And that gives us a deficit of $2 trillion. Of that deficit, $1 trillion of that is on interest on past debt. Okay, so let's walk through why this matters. It matters because when you add up all of the entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, this includes things like the entitlements that include unemployment and all that stuff. Add that all up, and then then those are signed into legislation. Those are mandatory programs, must be paid, absolutely must be paid, or it's a default, right, on those programs. So that's number one, have to pay them. And then you add on the not mandatory but not going away program of the military, which is it's over $850 billion, so almost $1 trillion there. And then you've got interest on your debt. Interest on your debt is over $1 trillion, net. So we have intergovernmental debt that's kind of paying yourself, left hand's paying the right hand, but net it all out, $1 trillion goes out the door, out the government's door for interest. That means that we're already in deficit, even if we cut everything else, every non-mandatory program, right? Anything that's optional, any of these programs that we could just stop paying for, research projects or, funding for certain infrastructure projects, whatever it is. If we just stop those, we're still in deficit. So the issue here is that there's nothing, this is where Lynn Alden gets her nothing stops this train, is that there's no way to really get rid of all this debt now that we've piled it up. We're at $37 trillion of debt, Sam, in the US, and it's doubling every 10 years. So just think through that for a second. We're going to be at $100 trillion of debt in 14 years. That's the trajectory. And I don't care what the CBO says, but they don't factor in recessions. They factor in lower interest rates. They don't, it's a rosy picture that they paint. And it's even as terrible as it is, it's still rosy compared to reality. The reality is we're going to keep piling on debt. We're going to be at $100 trillion of debt pretty soon in the next, 14, 15 years, maybe sooner, maybe 10 or 12, who knows? So here's the issue. And this is what you're asking, why is nobody talking about it? Well, there's a saying on Wall Street that if I owe the bank, $100,000, that's my problem, right? It's my problem. I got to find a way to pay that bank. But if I owe the bank $100 million, well, now it's the bank's problem.
Yeah.
So if you turn around, you look at the world, right? The US owes the world $37 trillion. That's the world's problem. It's not the US problem anymore. It's the world's problem. And so that is one of the issues here, that people won't talk about it because it's kind of taboo now. You know, you can't talk bad about central banks because they know inherently that you need continued borrowing, you need more liquidity. Like you just said, you need more air in that balloon to keep it going. You can't let the air out. And so what do you do? And this is the whole problem that you get to. Well, and people who are listening are thinking, oh, well, you just raise taxes, right? Okay, that's an idea. You raise taxes. The problem with raising taxes is that it eventually, the higher that tax rate goes, it stops and levels out about how much tax revenue you can generate from that, because it disincentivizes productivity, disincentivizes companies to put money back into the company for R&D, for expanding profitable business lines, for trying new business lines. They don't want to do it because they've already reached their tax rate, the top, and it's like, well, now they're disincentivized to really work that much harder to do much more, and companies will wind up leaving, as you're seeing in some of the Nordic countries, that you've got people leaving because they're getting taxed too much, and in the UK, right? So eventually GDP ends up contracting if you tax enough, and you get to the same spot. So you have higher taxes on lower productivity, which is actually a worse place to be because now you're in declining productivity. You don't want that.
So what can we take away from James Lavish's perspective? First, that the financial system we live in is built on unsustainable debt, and the math is undeniable. Second, that the solutions being offered, like raising taxes or cutting spending, don't come close to solving the root problem. And third, that Bitcoin is not just another speculative asset. It may be one of the only viable tools we have to protect ourselves from the coming storm. James Lavish's story is powerful because it's relatable. He was once skeptical, dismissive even, but after years of study, he saw the writing on the wall, and now he's dedicated his time to helping others see it too.
That's it for today's look into BTC Insight. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay on top of all the latest insights. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you in the next one.